I have to start this video by saying that if you're a person who's not into politics, then get engaged and vote, because policy affects everything from gas prices to what your kids learn in school. Even if you don't like any of the candidates, then vote for the one who sucks the least. Not engaging in the flawed system only makes the system worse because there's no longer anyone trying to fix it from the inside. Now, with that out of the way, in order for one to get engaged in deciding what the government should do or should look like, one must know what the government is. People differ on what the government is. And today, I will show my idea of what the government is. The government is a group of people self-regulating which has the highest authority accepted by said group of people. For example, a tribe with a chief is its own government. Sure, it is not that powerful, but the chief, as chosen by the tribe, will regulate and decide on what the actions of the people of the tribe should be. You take that tribe and put them inside of a nation, and if the tribe does not recognize the authority of the nation, their effective government will remain the chief and not the leader of the nation, despite the nation being more powerful. This is because the tribe does not recognize the nation's leader as someone who should be followed. Now, think for a moment. What would happen if the tribe suddenly did not recognize the chief, aka their governing body, as authoritative? They would either seek to change the government from the inside to become something worthy of authority, or they would seek to destroy the chief and replace him with either a new one or a new form of governance entirely. Through history, we can see that this process of changing the government often goes through the path of least resistance, be it by changing the government peacefully from the inside or forcefully from the outside. Now let's examine the French Revolution to see what happened. The lower classes first attempted to peacefully change the system from within, not because of the goodness of their hearts, but because that was, at the time, the path of least resistance. Sadly, however, the king, as well as the nobility and the clergy, denied the lower classes. This meant that it was nearly impossible for the system to correct itself and change from the inside. Since one of the two possibilities was made nearly impossible, the second one, i.e. forceful change from the outside, automatically became the path of least resistance. The lower classes did not revolt because they were evil, but because it was the easiest way to get what they wanted, a governance that they would see as more authoritative. It should be mentioned that the reason why the government lost authority in the eyes of the people was because the government failed to keep them satisfied. We see that the reason why we as individuals give authority to someone other than ourselves is because we think that doing as the other person says will lead to better outcomes than if we were to do it ourselves. For example, the peasants thought that the king was ordained by God to lead the people, and thus he had authority. The French king, however, was not able to get outcomes which the people would have been satisfied with, and thus the lower classes sought to change the government. This is why I believe that democracies are superior to most, if not all, other forms of governance. It's because the change in governance will almost always be easier through working within the system than to fight against it from the outside. But what about all the civil unrest in democracies, I hear you ask? Well, let's take a look at the most violent possible means of changing the government: civil war, specifically the American Civil War. The southern states wanted to keep the right of slavery, so they seceded when a man who they perceived wanted to abolish slavery, Abraham Lincoln, became the president. The federal government lost authority in the eyes of the southern leaders because they thought that this new president was going to lead to outcomes they did not like, and so they decided to change the government. Part 2. The ideal democracy. An important part of why democracy is so good is representation. If, let's say, only the wealthy 10% can vote, that means that the other 90% of the population might as well be living under a king, meaning that they don't have as much of an easy time changing the government from the inside than from the outside, making usage of force becomes more likely. So it goes without saying that if we want to have less violence, we need to make it easier to change the system from within, meaning that we need to allow everyone to vote so that no group will ever have an easier time changing the government through force than through peaceful cooperation. The ideal democracy would be a direct democracy, where every single voter is well educated on every single topic which they will be voting on. This, however, would require a perfect world, and sadly, we don't live in a perfect world. The logistics alone would make this impossible. Just gathering everyone in a place so that they can vote on every topic would be nearly impossible. Most people are too busy to learn about every single thing in order to cast an informed vote. By giving your vote to somebody else to vote for you, only that one person needs to be updated on all things important to the nation's interest. This is called representative democracy. However, my idea of representative democracy differs from others. Right now, in the biggest representative democracy in the world, America, the representatives only get one vote in the Senate, no matter how many people voted for them. I say that when you vote for someone, it should be as if they have borrowed that vote from you. So if we have 10,000 people who voted for a given candidate, that candidate can now vote for a given law with 10,001 vote, the additional vote being their own vote. This makes it so that if you have two candidates and one wins with 50.1% of the vote and the other loses with 49.9% of the vote, they both get to have a say in the government. Right now, the country could be split right down the middle on an issue, yet the side that gets just slightly more votes gets full power, while the side that barely lost gets nothing at all. This means that half of the country's votes did not matter. In order to not have too many representatives, each representative needs to get at least 1/8 of the vote in their local area in order to qualify. This is how local representatives should be picked. Ranked choice voting would probably be the best way of doing this, so that if your favorable candidate does not get the votes needed to qualify, you can at least have your second favorite win. That is what I think should be done with the legislative branch. For the executive branch, I think having a first past the post system is good. Wait, before you click off, please hear me out. While it's not particularly representative, the executive branch needs to always have a leader, unlike the Senate. With representative democracy, as I have described it, it is possible that the parliamentary organ of the government gets into a deadlock and is unable to form an executive branch. With a first past the post voting system, the executive branch is ensured to always have a head of state. Sure, many people will not like the head of state. However, the plurality will, and that is the best that we can reasonably do for the executive branch. This is important because you can't afford not to have a head of state to do foreign policy, especially if nuclear bombs are at stake. Part 3. Why democracies are better than most other forms of governance. Now, let's compare democracies to different government types, mainly theocracies and dictatorships. A dictatorship is fine stability-wise as long as the dictator makes it difficult for the people to try to change the system from the outside. This could be by funding the police and military while also minimizing the chance that people would want to change the system in the first place by keeping the citizens satisfied. The less satisfied the citizens, the more funding to the military needs to be made in order to stop the people from deciding to take over by force. The more satisfied the citizens, the less the dictatorship needs to pay the military to keep everything in check. In order to achieve this, a competent dictator needs to be in charge. The problem is that there is really no way to ensure the dictator is going to be competent. Most often, the dictator inherits their position from their father in a type of monarchy. And if you just so happen to get unlucky with a bad ruler, you'll have to stick it out until the ruler dies and hope their son is more competent. In a democracy, if the ruler is incompetent, they will be removed in 4 years. And if they are competent, they will remain in power for 4 more years. Barring special circumstances like a global catastrophe, a competent leader that is in power will remain in power because the people will be satisfied with their leadership. So the brutal downside to a dictatorship is that if you get a bad ruler, you're done for. While in a democracy, at most what happens is that the ruler will damage the nation for 4 years, but no more. That is, without even mentioning that since dictatorships inherently need to suppress the people more than democracies in order to have the same amount of stability, life for the average person would be less desirable under a dictatorship than a democracy, as it is likely that free speech would be outlawed and those who dislike the government would be imprisoned. For theocracies, kind of the same issue applies. Since it is a theocracy, it is more likely that someone is qualified to be a ruler on their piety rather than their ability to rule because of the nature of theocracies. But even if we were to say that they get people in based on rulership skills and not piety, we still run into a problem. A theocracy is not just grounded on religion. It's grounded on a specific interpretation of that religion. Given that most religions say that other religions are false, and subgroups in those religions say that the other subgroups are wrong, 99% of possible theocracies would be grounded on falsehoods, even if a religion happened to be true, which is debatable. Now, if the theocracy was run on the guidance of an omni-intelligent God that wants nothing more than to help us, it would be pretty good, because an omni-intelligent God knows best what to do. The problem lies in the ambiguity of which specific theocracy is correct, even if one can be correct. In short, theocracies require you to be incredibly lucky in order to have a good government, and that is with me granting that a religion is true. Let's say that your specific religion happened to be true. In a democracy, over time, the tenets of the religion would be picked up in the government just because they're effective. After all, if the religion is true, so are the tenets, and thus the government would be more effective if they were to be running on those tenets, and thus those politicians who imply those tenets would eventually win out because they are more effective than the others. In short, theocracies require you to be incredibly lucky in order to have a good government, and that is with me granting that a religion is true. In reality, I hold the position that no religion is true, and thus no theocracy can be the most effective form of governance, because they would be based on something that is not true. I think that the state shouldn't force the populace to believe in a specific religion, nor do I think that they should force people to become atheists. I think that these two realms should remain separate, because the government and religion have their own ways of corrupting one another. A politician might try to change certain beliefs of a religion to justify what they want to do, and a priest might use religion to justify what the government should do. Overall, I think that these two should not mix. But that's just what I think. Feel free to tell me what you think in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I plan on making a follow-up video on what role the government should play in society. Anyways, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, evening, night, depending on when you're watching this. And bye-bye. Subscribe.